Commander Elena Vasquez stood in the control room deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. The lights from her screens lit up her weathered face as she watched the stars through cameras hidden on the ocean floor. For 63 years, she had lived in this underwater base, just like her father before her and his father before him. The Guardians had been watching and waiting for 3,000 years. Above her head, alien ships moved through Earth's skies like they owned the place. The Veltar had taken humanity's homeworld so long ago that most of the galaxy had forgotten humans ever existed. But Elena remembered. Every Guardian remembered. They kept the old stories alive, passed down through generations of families who chose to stay behind when the rest of humanity was forced to leave. The Veltar thought they had won a complete victory. They believed all humans were gone, scattered to the dark spaces between stars in slow ships that would take lifetimes to reach anywhere safe. The aliens had made Earth into a trophy world, a place where their leaders came to hunt in the forests and swim in the clean oceans. They never looked too closely at what lay beneath the surface. Elena's fingers moved across her control panel, checking systems that had been built and rebuilt for 30 centuries. The Guardians had not been sitting idle. Every crashed alien ship, every piece of technology the Veltar left behind, every transmission they thought was secret. The humans had studied it all. They learned how the aliens thought, how they fought, and most importantly, how they could be beaten. A soft chime made Elena look up. Her communications officer, Lieutenant Torres, was pointing at his screen with excitement. "Commander, we're getting a signal. It's them. The fleets are coming home." Elena felt her heart speed up. She had been born in this underwater world, had never seen the sky except through cameras. But she knew this day would come. Her grandmother had told her stories about the great ships that carried Earth's children away to the stars. Now those children were coming back, and they would not be the same frightened refugees who had left so long ago. The message was encrypted with codes so old that only the Guardians still knew them. Elena read the words on her screen and smiled. "Terran Reclamation Force approaching Sol system. 3 million ships strong. Estimated arrival in 6 months. Begin final preparations." 3 million ships. Elena whistled softly. When humanity had been forced to leave Earth, they had maybe 1,000 vessels of all sizes. In 3,000 years, those refugees had built an armada that made the original Exodus look like a small fishing fleet. Torres was already working at his station. "Commander, should I activate the deep networks?" "Do it," Elena said. "Wake everything up. It's time the Veltar learned what we've been building down here." Across the ocean floor, machines that had slept for decades came to life. In the deepest ocean trenches, massive doors opened for the first time in centuries. The Guardians had not just been hiding, they had been preparing Earth itself for war. The planet's magnetic field began to change as ancient generators deep in the Earth's core started spinning faster. To any alien sensors watching from space, it would look like natural variation. They had no idea that humans had spent 3,000 years turning their homeworld into the largest weapon ever built. Elena walked to the main display screen, which showed a map of the entire solar system. Red dots marked Guardian bases scattered across every world and moon. Mars had been completely hollowed out and filled with shipyards and weapons factories. The asteroid belt had been turned into a maze of hidden fortresses. Even Venus, with its crushing atmosphere and deadly heat, had been colonized by humans in environmental suits who built terrible weapons in the planet's depths. But Earth was the crown jewel of their preparations. The Guardians had learned to work with their planet's natural systems, turning them into tools of war. The aurora that danced in the polar skies was actually a massive shield generator. The volcanic activity along the ocean ridges powered weapon systems that could crack moons. The very rotation of the planet had been carefully adjusted to optimize firing solutions for weapons the size of mountain ranges. "Ma'am," Torres called out, We're getting responses from all Guardian stations. Luna Base reports ready. Mars Command is online. The Belt Fortresses are powering up. Everyone's been waiting for this signal. Elena nodded. Luna Base was built inside the moon itself, with weapons that could turn the satellite into a mobile battle station. The humans had been very busy during their 3,000 years of defeat. She thought about the aliens living on Earth's surface, completely unaware of what was happening beneath their feet. Veltar cities dotted the continents, filled with alien families who had never known war. Their children played in parks built over human burial grounds. Their leaders made laws in buildings that stood where human governments once met. The Veltar had always believed that taking Earth was their right. They were older, more advanced, more civilized than the violent humans. They had convinced themselves that forcing humanity into exile was an act of mercy, saving the galaxy from a dangerous species. They never considered that exile might make humans more dangerous, not less. Elena accessed her personal files and looked at images from the day of exile. She had seen them thousands of times, but they never stopped making her angry. Human families, being separated as they were forced onto different ships, children crying for parents they would never see again. Earth's leaders making their final broadcast, promising that humanity would return someday. That day had finally come. The Guardians had maintained radio contact with the human fleets for the first few centuries after the exile. They knew their people had survived, had found new worlds, had built new civilizations. But the signals had grown weaker over time as the ships traveled further from home. For the last 1,000 years, there had been only silence. Now the silence was broken, and the news was better than Elena had dared to hope. The scattered humans had not just survived, they had thrived. They had united their scattered fleets into one mighty armada. They had built technologies that would make the Veltar's weapons look like toys. Most importantly, they had not forgotten Earth. Elena opened a communication channel to all Guardian bases across the solar system. Attention all stations. The waiting is over. Our people are coming home and they're bringing friends. Begin Phase 1 preparations immediately. After 3,000 years, it's time to remind the galaxy what happens when you try to destroy humanity. Across the solar system, ancient machines began to hum with power. Hidden weapons turned their attention toward the outer planets where the human fleet would first arrive. Defense systems that had been tested and improved for 30 centuries prepared for their first real battle. The Veltar had made one mistake when they forced humanity to leave Earth. They had assumed that exile would break the human spirit, scatter their people so widely that they could never unite again. Instead, exile had forged humanity into something harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Elena smiled as she watched the status reports flowing in from every corner of the solar system. The Guardians had kept their promise. They had protected Earth and prepared for this day. Now all they had to do was wait for their people to come home and begin the reckoning that was 3,000 years in the making. Captain Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the New Terra, watching the stars that had been humanity's home for 3,000 years. His ship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before, part machine, part living organism, and entirely deadly. The hull breathed slowly like a sleeping animal, while weapons that looked more like tentacles than cannons moved restlessly along its sides. Marcus himself was no longer entirely human, at least not in the way his ancestors would have recognized. His eyes could see across the entire spectrum of light. His bones were reinforced with metals stronger than steel. His brain could process information faster than most computers. The exile had changed humanity in ways their enemies could never have imagined. Behind the New Terra stretched a fleet of 3 million ships, each one unique, each one grown rather than built. The humans had learned to merge biology with technology, creating vessels that could repair themselves, adapt to new threats, and even reproduce when needed. Where other species built their ships in factories, humans grew theirs in vast nurseries that looked more like gardens than shipyards. Marcus remembered the stories his grandmother had told him about old Earth, the blue world where humanity was born. He had never seen it except in ancient recordings, but every human in the fleet carried the memory of home in their genetic code. They had been wandering the stars for 100 generations, but they had never forgotten where they came from or why they had been forced to leave. The bridge crew around Marcus was busy preparing for the long journey home. Navigation officer Sarah Kim was studying the route back to Seoul, plotting a course that would avoid Veltar patrol routes. Weapons specialist David Park was running diagnostics on the ship's biocannons, making sure they were ready for the war that was coming. Communications. Chief Lisa Jang was coordinating with the other ships in the fleet, ensuring that 3 million vessels could move as one. All of them shared Marcus's modifications. The human diaspora had spent centuries perfecting themselves, using genetic engineering and technological implants to become the ultimate spacefaring species. They could survive in vacuum for hours, see in total darkness, and react faster than any alien could follow. They had turned themselves into living weapons. "Captain," Sarah called out, "we're receiving updates from the other fleet commanders. Admiral Chen wants all captains to review the final battle plans." Marcus nodded and activated his neural link to the fleet's communication network. Instantly, his mind was connected to every other human consciousness in the Armada. 3 million. People thinking as one, sharing knowledge and experiences faster than any computer network could manage. This was another gift of the exile. Humans had learned to work together in ways that no other species could match. The battle plans flowed through Marcus's consciousness like water. The fleet was divided into specialized groups, each with its own role in the coming war. The destroyers would engage enemy fleets directly, using weapons that could crack planets. The infiltrators would slip past enemy defenses and strike at vital targets. The builders would construct new ships and weapons during the battle itself, adapting to whatever the enemy threw at them. But the most important ships were the Rememberers. These vessels carried the complete history of humanity's exile. Every crime the Veltar had committed, every injustice they had ignored. When the war was over, there would be no denying what had been done or why humans had returned with such fury. Marcus disconnected from the network and looked at his crew. They were all young by human standards, barely 200 years old. They had been born in the deep spaces between stars, raised on stories of the home world they had never seen. Their parents and grandparents had spent their lives preparing for this moment, building the ships and weapons that would carry humanity back to Earth. "Status report," Marcus ordered. "All systems are optimal," David reported. "Bioweapons are at full readiness. The ship is eager for battle." Marcus smiled. The ships really were eager. They had been bred for war, designed to hunt and kill with the same instincts that had once helped humans survive on prehistoric Earth. The exile had not made humans weaker. It had stripped away everything that was not essential for survival, leaving behind something pure and deadly. "Time to Sol system?" Marcus asked. 6 months, 14 days, Sarah answered. "We'll arrive just as the Guardians finish their preparations." The Guardians. Marcus felt a deep respect for the humans who had chosen to stay behind on Earth, hiding in the depths of the oceans and the cores of mountains while aliens walked on the surface above. They had maintained the old technologies, prepared the way for humanity's return, and suffered in silence for 3,000 years. Soon, their sacrifice would be rewarded. Marcus activated the ship's memory core and reviewed the intelligence reports that had been gathered over the centuries. Human agents, their appearances altered to look like other species, had infiltrated every level of Veltar society. They worked as servants in alien government buildings, soldiers in alien armies, even advisors to alien leaders. The Veltar had no idea how completely they had been penetrated. These agents had sent back detailed information about Veltar military capabilities, political structures, and social weaknesses. Marcus knew which alien generals were competent and which were fools. He knew which Veltar worlds were heavily defended and which were vulnerable. Most importantly, he knew that the Veltar had grown soft during their 3,000 years of dominance. The aliens had become bureaucrats and administrators, managing their empire from comfortable offices, while automated systems did the actual work of defense. They had not fought a real war in over a millennium. Their weapons were powerful but predictable. Their tactics were based on overwhelming force rather than cleverness or adaptation. Humanity, on the other hand, had spent every day of the last 3,000 years preparing for war. They had fought pirates and monsters in the dark spaces between stars. They had battled hostile environments on worlds where nothing should be able to survive. They had turned themselves into the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever seen. "Captain," Lisa announced, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. Guardian Command wants to coordinate our arrival with their final preparations." Marcus felt a thrill of excitement. After 3,000 years, humanity was finally going to speak with one voice again. The children of Earth were coming home, and they were bringing gifts. Terrible, beautiful gifts that would remind the galaxy why humans were feared long before they were exiled. "Put me through to Commander Vasquez," Marcus ordered. The communication system hummed as it connected across the vast distance between the fleet and Earth. When Elena Vasquez's face appeared on the screen, Marcus felt like he was looking at a long-lost sister. She had the same modifications as the fleet humans, the same predator's eyes, the same aura of barely controlled violence. "Commander," Marcus said, "this is Captain Chen of the Terran Reclamation Force. We're coming home." Elena smiled, and Marcus saw 30 centuries of patient fury in that expression. "Welcome back, Captain. We've kept the lights on for you. Earth is ready for war." Marcus looked out at the stars that lay between his fleet and home. In 6 months, those stars would witness the most one-sided battle in galactic history. The Veltar had exiled humanity thinking they were removing a threat. Instead, they had created an enemy beyond their worst nightmares. The scattered children of Earth were coming home, and they would not be denied their birthright again. Supreme Admiral Kethvar stood in the command center of his flagship, studying the reports that filled his screens with growing disbelief. The primitive humans were actually returning to their lost home world. After 3,000 years of wandering, the galaxy like homeless beggars, they thought they could simply come back and reclaim what was no longer theirs. Kethvar was old, even by Veltar standards. He had lived for over 4,000 years and commanded fleets that conquered entire star systems. He remembered when his people had first encountered the humans. Violent, chaotic creatures who fought wars over resources that more civilized. Species shared peacefully. Exiling them had been an act of mercy, really. The galaxy was better off without such barbaric influences. Now his sensors showed a massive fleet approaching the outer edge of Veltar space. 3 million ships, according to the reports. Kethvar found that number hard to believe. When the humans had been forced to leave Earth, they had barely managed to scrape together 1,000 vessels. How could such a disorganized species have built an armada of this size? "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "the human fleet has entered the Proxima system. They're not responding to our warnings to turn back." Kethvar nodded calmly. "Send the 4th Fleet to intercept them. 1,000 ships should be more than enough to deal with whatever crude weapons the humans have managed to build." The humans had always been inferior to the Veltar in technology and organization. 3,000 years of exile would not have changed that fundamental truth. They were probably desperate refugees hoping to negotiate for a small colony world somewhere in the outer systems. A show of force would convince them to accept whatever terms the Veltar were willing to offer. But something strange was happening on the sensor displays. The human ships were not behaving like any vessels Kethvar had ever seen. They moved through space with an organic fluidity that reminded him more of living creatures than mechanical constructs. When his scouts tried to get close enough for detailed scans, the human vessels simply disappeared from sensors only to reappear somewhere else entirely. "Admiral," his communications officer called out with worry in his voice. "We've lost contact with Scout Group 7. Their last transmission said they were approaching a human vessel for inspection." Kethvar frowned. "Lost contact? Define lost contact." "Sir, they're gone. No debris, no distress signals, no trace on sensors. It's like they never existed." This was concerning. The Veltar had not lost ships in combat for over 1,000 years. Their technology was so advanced that most conflicts ended before they really began. How could primitive human vessels make Veltar scouts simply vanish? The answer came 12 hours later when Scout Group 7's ships reappeared on sensors. But something was wrong with them. They were broadcasting Veltar identification codes, but their movement patterns were completely different. When Kethvar tried to contact them, the response made his blood run cold. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Kim of the Terran Reclamation Force," a human voice said through his speakers. "Thank you for the ships. We'll put them to good use." Kethvar stared at his screen in shock. The humans had somehow taken control of Veltar vessels without damaging them. How was that possible? Veltar ships had security systems that would destroy the vessel before allowing alien control. "Sir," his tactical officer said urgently, "we're getting reports from across the sector. Human ships are appearing near our patrol routes, but they're not attacking. They're just watching." Kethvar pulled up a tactical display of the entire region. Red dots marked confirmed human vessels, and there were far more of them than there should be. The main fleet was still days away from Veltar territory, but somehow individual human ships were already everywhere, moving freely through space that should have been secure. "How are they getting past our sensor networks?" Kethvar demanded. His science officer, a nervous creature named Vector, worked frantically at his console. "Admiral, I think they're not getting past our sensors. I think they're invisible to them. These readings suggest the human ships are using some kind of adaptive camouflage that changes to match whatever scanning frequency we use." Adaptive camouflage. Kethvar had heard theoretical discussions about such technology, but every computer simulation said it was impossible to build. The power requirements alone would be enormous, and the processing speed needed to adapt to multiple sensor types simultaneously was beyond even Veltar capabilities. But the humans seemed to have solved these impossible problems. More disturbing reports were coming in from across Veltar space. Human agents, their appearance surgically altered to look like various alien species, were being discovered in positions throughout the government and military. Some had been in place for centuries, working their way up through the ranks while sending intelligence back to their true masters. "Admiral," his intelligence chief reported with obvious fear, "we've discovered human infiltrators in 17 different government departments, including 3 on the High Council itself. They've had access to our most classified information for over 200 years. Kethvar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. The humans had been playing a game that lasted centuries, positioning their pieces while the Veltar remained completely unaware. This was not the desperate charge of refugees trying to reclaim their home. This was a carefully planned operation by an enemy that had spent 3,000 years preparing for war. "Send word to the High Council," Kethvar ordered. "Tell them to mobilize the entire fleet, all 10,000 ships. If the humans want to fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget." But even as he gave the order, Kethvar was beginning to understand that this would not be the simple victory he had expected. The humans had changed during their exile. They had become something that the Veltar did not understand and could not predict. 3 days later, as the Veltar armada gathered near Earth, Kethvar got his first look at the solar system that had once been humanity's home. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about the species his people had exiled. Earth itself looked wrong. The planet's aurora was too bright, too organized, moving in patterns that suggested artificial control. The magnetic field readings were impossible. No natural planetary field could be that strong or that precisely focused. As his fleet approached, sensors detected massive structures hidden beneath the ocean floors and buried in the planet's crust. "Admiral," Vector called out in a shaking voice, "I'm reading weapons signatures from the planet's surface, but the power levels, they're off the scale. Some of these installations appear to be drawing energy directly from the planet's core." Kethvar stared at the data in disbelief. The humans had not just hidden on Earth during their exile. They had spent 3,000 years turning their entire world into a weapon. Every mountain, every ocean, every continent had been modified and militarized. Then Mars began to move. It started slowly, just a slight change in the planet's orbital position. But as Kethvar watched, the red world pulled away from its normal path and began accelerating toward the Veltar fleet. Massive engines, hidden beneath the Martian surface for millennia, were pushing the entire planet out of its orbit. "By the gods," Kethvar whispered, "they've turned their worlds into kinetic weapons." Jupiter's great red spot suddenly flared, with energy, revealing itself to be a massive collector feeding power to weapons scattered throughout the solar system. Saturn's rings began moving with mechanical precision. Billions of small objects that looked like rocks, but moved like guided missiles. The human fleet arrived just as the Veltar began to understand the trap they had flown into. 3 million. Ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their biomechanical hulls gleaming with their own inner light. They moved like a single organism, flowing around the Veltar armada like water around stones. For the first time in his 4,000-year life, Supreme Admiral Kethvar felt afraid. The Veltar had exiled humanity, thinking they were removing a threat to galactic peace. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous, an enemy that had spent 3 millennia turning defeat into preparation for the ultimate victory. The reckoning had begun, and Kethvar realized with growing horror that his people were not the hunters in this battle. They were the prey. The battle began not with the thunder of weapons, but with silence. As the Veltar armada faced the human fleet near Earth, Admiral Kethvar waited for the traditional exchange of demands and threats that preceded civilized warfare. Instead, the humans simply attacked. There was no warning, no declaration of intent, no final chance for surrender. One moment the space between the fleets was empty, and the next it was filled with death. Human ships that had been invisible to sensors suddenly appeared inside the Veltar formation, firing weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Captain Marcus Chen watched from the bridge of the New Terra as his ship's biocannons reached out like living tentacles, wrapping around a Veltar cruiser and crushing it like an egg. His vessel's hull rippled and changed, growing new weapon systems in real time to counter whatever defenses the aliens tried to deploy. "Target their command ship," Marcus ordered. "Let's introduce their admiral to the new humanity." The New Terra moved through space like a predator, its living hull adapting to every attack the Veltar threw at it. Energy beams that should have burned through the ship's armor were absorbed and redirected. Missiles that should have exploded on impact were caught by defensive fields and turned back at their launchers. This was what 3,000 years of exile had created, ships that were more alive than mechanical, crewed by humans who were more than human. The Veltar fought with the tactics of the past, using overwhelming firepower and rigid formations. Humanity fought like a force of nature, flowing around obstacles and striking from impossible angles. On the flagship of the Veltar fleet, Admiral Kethvar watched his carefully organized battle plan fall apart within minutes. His ships were designed to fight other ships, not creatures that seemed to phase in and out of reality. Every time his gunners locked onto a human vessel, it would change shape or simply disappear, only to reappear behind his lines. All ships, maintain formation, Kethvar ordered, but his words were pointless. The human fleet was not fighting like a fleet at all. Each ship acted independently, finding its own targets and using its own tactics. They moved like a school of fish or a flock of birds, all connected by some invisible intelligence that let them work together without rigid commands. Worse than the physical attack was the psychological warfare. The humans had taken over Veltar, communication frequencies, and were broadcasting recordings from the original exile. Alien crews heard the voices of human children being separated from their parents, the desperate pleas of families being torn apart, the cold pronouncements of Veltar leaders declaring humanity unfit for galactic civilization. Turn off those transmissions, Kethvar ordered, but his communications officer shook his head helplessly. I can't, sir. They've somehow gained control of our entire communication network. Every ship in the fleet is hearing this. The psychological attack was working. Veltar crews who had never questioned the righteousness of their cause were suddenly faced with the reality of what their ancestors had done. Young soldiers who had been told that humanity was exiled for the good of the galaxy heard the truth, that an entire species had been scattered to the stars for the crime of being different. But the humans were not content to simply defeat the Veltar fleet. As the battle raged near Earth, reports were coming in from across the galaxy of simultaneous attacks on every major Veltar world. The human agents who had been hiding in alien society for centuries were finally revealing themselves, and they were not alone. On the Veltar homeworld of Kethvar Prime, Governor Zelthok was in the middle of an emergency council meeting when his own security chief stood up and removed a device from his throat. The alien features fell away like a mask, revealing a human face beneath. "My name is Agent David Park," the human said calmly. "I've been working here for 230 years, and I have a message from Earth." The governor and his council stared in shock as the human activated a small transmitter. Instantly, every screen in the building displayed images of human children being forced onto exile ships, of families being destroyed, of Earth burning as Veltar forces claimed it as their own. "This is what you did to us," Agent Park said simply. "Now we're going to show you what 3,000 years of preparation can accomplish." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds. Human sleeper agents were revealing themselves, taking control of defense networks, broadcasting the truth about humanity's exile. But they were not working alone. On world after world, oppressed alien species that had been conquered by the Veltar were rising in rebellion, armed with weapons and intelligence provided by human agents. The Veltar Dominion was discovering that humanity had not been their only victim. Over the millennia, the alien coalition had suppressed, enslaved, or eliminated dozens of species that did not fit their vision of galactic order. The humans had found these oppressed peoples and offered them something the Veltar never had: hope for freedom. Back in the Sol system, the battle was reaching its climax. The Veltar fleet was being systematically destroyed, not by superior numbers, but by superior adaptation. Human ships learned from every attack, growing stronger and deadlier with each passing moment. Some began reproducing during the battle itself, splitting into smaller vessels that could attack from multiple directions. Admiral Kethvar watched his flagship's shields fail as a human bioship wrapped itself around his vessel's hull like a parasite. The alien metal began to dissolve under the touch of human bioweapons, and he realized with horror that his ship was being digested. "This is Admiral Kethvar to all Veltar forces," he broadcast on emergency frequencies. "Withdraw immediately. The humans are not what we thought they were. This is not a battle, it's an execution." But it was too late for withdrawal. Earth's planetary defense systems had finally revealed themselves, and they were beyond anything the Veltar had imagined possible. The planet's magnetic field had become a weapon that could reach across millions of kilometers to crush ships, like insects. The aurora that danced in Earth's skies was actually a massive energy projection system that could burn alien vessels out of space with focused beams of pure destruction. Mars, still accelerating toward the alien fleet, had opened, like a flower to reveal its true nature. The entire planet was hollow, filled with manufacturing systems that were building new human ships faster than the Veltar could destroy them. What the aliens had thought was a simple kinetic weapon was actually a mobile fortress capable of replacing the entire human fleet in a matter of hours. Captain Marcus Chen stood on his bridge and watched the last Veltar ship fall to human weapons. Around him, his crew was already planning the next phase of their campaign. This battle was not the end of the war. It was barely the beginning. "Communications," Marcus ordered. "Open a channel to all human agents throughout the galaxy. Tell them Phase 2 is authorized. It's time to finish what the Veltar started 3,000 years ago." The human fleet began to disperse, individual ships heading out to join the rebellions, now raging on 100 worlds. They carried with them weapons and technologies that would tip the balance of every conflict in favor of freedom over oppression. The Veltar had exiled humanity, thinking they were removing a dangerous species from galactic civilization. Instead, they had created liberators who understood that freedom was not given, it was taken. And humanity was very, very good at taking things. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, Commander Elena Vasquez stood in the ruins of the Veltar High Council chambers on their homeworld. The massive building had once been the center of galactic power, where alien leaders made decisions that affected billions of lives across hundreds of star systems. Now, it was a monument to the price of oppression, its broken walls covered with images of every species the Veltar had destroyed or enslaved over the millennia. The war had ended not with a final battle, but with a final revelation. Using technology that the aliens still could not understand, humanity had broadcast the complete historical record of galactic civilization to every world, every ship, every communication device in Veltar space. For the first time, the galaxy saw the truth about their supposed protectors. The Veltar had not brought peace and order to the stars. They had brought tyranny disguised as civilization. Species after species had been given the same choice. The Veltar had once offered humanity, submit to their vision of galactic order or face extinction. Most had submitted. Those who refused had been forgotten, their stories erased from official records, but humans never forgot anything. Elena looked down at the former Supreme Admiral Kethvar, who knelt before her in the same chamber where his ancestors had once pronounced humanity's exile. The old alien was barely recognizable. The defeat of his people had broken something fundamental in his mind, leaving him a shadow of the proud commander who had led the greatest armada in galactic history to its destruction. "Do you understand now?" Elena asked quietly. "Do you see what you created when you scattered us to the stars?" Kethvar looked up with eyes that had seen too much. "You were supposed to be broken," he whispered. "Exile was supposed to destroy your unity, scatter your people so widely that you could never threaten anyone again." Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You thought exile would make us weak. Instead, it made us patient. It gave us time to plan, to prepare, to become something you could never defeat. 3,000 years is a long time to hold a grudge." Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species stood watching. These were the survivors of Veltar oppression, the descendants of peoples who had been conquered or enslaved over the millennia. Some had fought alongside humanity during the final campaigns. Others had risen in rebellion when human agents provided them with weapons and intelligence. All of them had one thing in common. They had suffered under Veltar rule and lived to see their oppressors fall. Captain Marcus Chen entered the chamber, his biomechanical ship having landed directly in the ruins of the Veltar capital. His vessel looked out of place among the classical architecture, its living hull breathing slowly as it rested. The sight of it made several alien diplomats step back nervously. Even after months of working with humans, they were still unsettled by humanity's merger of biology and technology. "Status report," Elena asked. "The last Veltar strongholds have surrendered," Marcus replied. "Their remaining fleets are standing down across the galaxy. The rebellion movements we supported have taken control of their homeworlds and are establishing new governments." Elena nodded. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Humanity had not fought for 3,000 years just to replace one empire with another. They had fought to ensure that no species would ever again face the choice between submission and extinction. "What are your terms?" Kethvar asked weakly. "Will you exile us as we exiled you? Will you scatter our people to the stars and forbid us from returning home?" Elena considered the question carefully. It would be justice in a way. The Veltar had shown no mercy to humanity or any other species that opposed them. They had ruled through fear and force, crushing any culture that did not match their vision of civilization. By their own standards, they deserved the same fate. They had imposed on others. But humanity had learned something during their 3,000 years of exile. They had learned that mercy was not weakness, and that true strength came from building up rather than tearing down. "No," Elena said finally. "We won't exile you. That would make us no better than you were. Instead, we're going to give you something your people never gave anyone else. A choice." She gestured to a group of humans who had been waiting outside the chamber. They carried with them a device that looked like a simple crystal, but Elena knew it contained something far more powerful. Than any weapon, it contained hope. "This device will broadcast the complete history of galactic civilization to every world in Veltar space," Elena explained. "Not just the official version your leaders wrote, but the real history. The stories of every species you conquered, every culture you destroyed, every individual you exiled or killed. Your people will learn the truth about what their empire was built on." Kethvar stared at the device in horror. "You'll destroy our entire civilization. When our people learn what we've done, society will collapse." "Maybe," Elena agreed. "Or maybe your people will choose to build something better. That's the choice we're giving you. Face the truth about your past and try to create a better future, or continue living the lie and face the consequences." Marcus stepped forward, his enhanced features making him look more like a predator than a diplomat. "But understand this, if any Veltar world chooses to continue the old ways, if any of your people try to rebuild your empire of oppression, we will stop them. Permanently." The threat was clear, and Kethvar shuddered as he realized what humanity had become. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were gardeners, pruning away the diseased parts of galactic civilization while nurturing the healthy growth. Any species willing to live in peace and freedom would be protected. Those who chose oppression would be eliminated. Elena activated the crystal device, and across the galaxy, the true history of the Veltar Dominion began broadcasting on every frequency. On world after world, alien populations learned for the first time about the crimes their leaders had committed in their name. Some reacted with anger, others with shame, still others with determination to build a better future. The Veltar Empire was dead, but something new was being born in its place. Humanity had become the galaxy's gardeners, protecting the growth of new civilizations while ensuring that the weeds of oppression could never take root again. "What will you call it?" Kethvar asked quietly. "Your new empire?" Elena looked out, through the broken walls of the chamber at the human ships landing across the alien capital. Her people were already at work, helping the local population establish new governments, providing technology and resources to rebuild what war had destroyed. They were not conquerors. They were liberators who had learned that true victory came, not from defeating enemies, but from turning them into friends. "We won't call it an empire," Elena said. "Empires rise and fall. What we're building will last because it's based on choice, not force. Every species will have the right to live as they choose, as long as they don't choose to oppress others. She turned to face the assembled representatives from across the galaxy. We're calling it the Terran Protectorate, not because we will rule you, but because we will protect your right to rule yourselves. The galaxy had learned the ultimate lesson about humanity. You could exile them from their homes, scatter them across the stars, and force them to wander in the darkness for millennia. But you could not break their spirit, and you could not make them forget. They would always find their way back, and they would always remember who had tried to keep them away. 3,000 years of exile had ended not with humanity's destruction, but with their evolution into something the galaxy had never seen before. A species powerful enough to rule everything, but wise enough to choose freedom instead. The scattered children of Earth had come home, and they had brought with them the greatest gift of all, the promise that no species would ever again face the choice between submission and extinction. In the end, that was humanity's true victory, and it was a victory that would echo through the stars for all time.